All right, Shalom. I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakak Wadash. I'd like to give double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who I learned this truth from. And I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. And today is Monday, August 25th, 2025, Missile Monday. And I have this article from Reuters. And it says, Special Report, China's Growing Nuclear Arsenal. So I'm just going to go into this article and we got a few scriptures. Lord willing, this lesson is edifying and straight to the point. And it says, alongside a massive buildup in conventional military firepower, China has embarked on a rapid and sustained increase in the size and capability of its nuclear forces, according to the U.S. military and arms control experts. The commander of the U.S. Strategic Command, General Anthony Cotton, told Congress in March that the directive from Chinese leader Xi Jinping that China's military be ready to seize Taiwan by 2027 was driving a buildup of nuclear weapons that could be launched from land, air, and sea. In its 2023 National Defense Policy, China renewed its long-standing pledge that it would not be the first to use nuclear weapons under any circumstances. The so-called no first use policy also includes a promise that China will not use or threaten to use nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear armed state. In response to questions, the Defense Ministry in Beijing said a nuclear war cannot be won and must not be waged. China is said adhered to a nuclear strategy of self-defense and pursues a no first use policy. Says in its annual report on Chinese military power, the Pentagon said despite China's public stance, its strategy probably includes a possible first use in response to conventional attacks that threaten the viability of its nuclear forces, command and control, or that approximates the effort of a nuclear strike. Beijing would also probably consider nuclear first use if a conventional military defeat in Taiwan gravely threatened the communist regime's survival, the Pentagon said in the report published late last year. China's defense ministry said it opposed any attempt to hype up the so-called Chinese nuclear threat in an effort to smear and defame China and deliberately mislead the international community. China is expanding and modernizing its weapons stockpile faster than any other nuclear armed power and has accumulated about 600 warheads. According to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, a Chicago-based nonprofit, it said China is building about 350 new missile silos and several new bases for road mobile launchers. It estimated that China's military, the People's Liberation Army, had about 712 launchers from land-based missiles, but not all were assigned for nuclear weapons. Of those launchers, 462 can be loaded with missiles that can reach the continental United States, it said. Many of the PLA's launchers are for shorter range missiles intended to attack regional targets, but most of those were not assigned for a nuclear strike, the bulletin's assignment said. So right, man, again, this is what you have. You still have these different nations that are gearing up for war. So China, now they're beefing up their nuclear arsenal. They're getting ready. What are they getting ready for? They're getting ready for World War III. They're getting ready to take America down because that is the end game, where Babylon the Great, aka America, is going to be destroyed by missiles, and this is what you're going to have. And this also proves, because I have to throw this in there, this also proves that, the so-called Jewish people are not the biblical Israelites, because it clearly states that the Israelites would dwell in peace, that the nations would no more learn war, pursuing Isaiah 2, but what do you have? You have the exact opposite. You have nations that are gearing up for war, that are exhausting their resources into their military, and into their nuclear stockpile, for the nations that are nuclear armed, So things are going to continue to heat up. So I'm going to start with the book of Joel, chapter 3, and verse 9. And it says, "Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords, and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong and right, man." These different nations went from having farming tools to having weapons, man. Excuse me, Slakia. And this is what you have. You have these different nations, especially these nuclear armed nations that have, exhausted their resources into, building up their military, into, upping their nuclear arsenal. And China right now is the latest nation that is expanding its nuclear arsenal, And this is not good news for America because, again, Taiwan and the United States are allies, But again, China wants to take over Taiwan, which Taiwan is a part of China's, I want to say their province, because it's, it's in a separate island, or it is an island, but it's still a part of China, just like Ukraine is a part of Russia, China or Taiwan is a part of China. And again, these particular rulers, they want to take over these lands. You have Putin, he wants to take the Ukraine because the Ukraine was a part of the USSR, before it fell in the 1990s, and Taiwan was a part of China. I have to do a little research, but understand that this is what's going on. These different nations are gearing up for war. So real quick, get the book of Malachi, chapter 4, and verse 1. And it says, "For behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, all that do wickedly, shall be stubble, and the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch." And right, what is that day that is coming, man? That's going to burn as an oven. World War III, aka the day of the Lord, man. That day is vastly approaching. But we know that there is an appointed time when this destruction is going to take place, because we still have to wait on, two major prophecies to take place. The main one being the mass implementation of the mark of the beast, spoken of in Revelation chapter 13 and verse 16 to 18, which is the RFID microchip. Once that prophecy comes to pass, once the prophecy of Jacob's trouble comes to pass, then, that destruction eventually is going to, come to pass, So let's get the book of Revelation, chapter 11 and verse 14. And it says, "The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly." And right, you had World War One, in the early 1900s, I want to say from about 1915 to about 1919, if I got those years correctly, and then you had World War II, which, came to pass from 1939 to 1945, now you're going to, World War III, which just like it says in the scriptures, man, it's only going to take the Lord, 1 hour to destroy this place, pursuant to Revelation 18. That's all it's going to take, 1 hour. Those two wars took years, Slakia. Those 2 years took, those two wars took years, to eventually end. But this war is literally only going to take 60 minutes, man. Because once America gets destroyed, that's it. That's it for this place. And again, man, this is the weapon that is going to be used to destroy this place. This is the book of Isaiah, chapter 54, and verse 16. And it says, Behold, I have created the smith that bloweth the coals and the fire, and that bringeth forth an instrument for his work. And I have created the waster to destroy and right, man. These modern day scientists and physicists, would be the modern blacksmiths, because what does a blacksmith do? They create weapons of war, but what are these scientists doing, man? They're not only creating weapons of war, they're creating weapons of mass destruction, because these nuclear missiles that are on the earth today have the capability of literally destroying the earth, But as it says in the scriptures, the earth abideth forever. The planet earth will not be destroyed, but only lands. As it stands, two places are confirmed that are going to get hit. America is going to be completely destroyed, and the land of Israel is going to be destroyed, but again, it'll be built back up. Jerusalem is going to be made beautiful again, but America is going to be left completely desolate. Isaiah, the 34th chapter, gives a vivid description of how America is going to look after that fire goes out, So, staying in Isaiah, I want to jump to Slakia. All right. This is the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, and verse 5. And it says, Every battle of the warrior is with confused noise, and garments rolled in blood, but this shall be with burning and fuel of fire. And right, man, this isn't going to be a traditional war, that's coming, because just like you had ancient warfare, men on one side of the battlefield, charging, or what men on one side of the battlefield, up against men on the other side of the battlefield, charging each other in the center, hand-to-hand combat, the men having swords, shields, spears, bow and arrows, these different, weapons of war, fighting hand-to-hand, World War III won't be fought that way, And as I always mention, you will have ground troops, that are going to go to war with each other, but World War III is primarily going to be fought with these nuclear missiles. And I almost forgot to mention, that in Isaiah, 54, the 16th verse, in the latter part of that verse, the waster to destroy is talking about the missile themselves, in particular the warhead, because that's the part of the missile that does the damage, So I'm going to get the book of Isaiah, chapter 13, and verse 4. And it says, The noise of a multitude in the mountains, like as of a great people, a tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts mustereth the battle. It's like the Lord of hosts mustereth the hosts of the battle, and the noise of a multitude, like as of a great people, that's talking about the missiles, that tumultuous noise, because you're going to hear them, man. These missiles are going to be loud because you're going to hear the rocket propulsion system guiding these missiles to their target, and there's going to be thousands upon thousands of them, headed toward America, right? Verse 5, it says, They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, even the Lord, and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land. And right, man, even though Esau's blessing is the sword, pursuant to Genesis 27 and 40, these nuclear missiles that are on the earth today, they're the Lord's weapons. You know, these are his weapons, just like it says, they're the weapons of his indignation, man. You know, and it says to destroy the whole land, because again, these missiles are going to be shot from one end of the earth and land in the other. You know, for example, missiles will be launched from Russia and they're going to land here in America. You know, all of these different nations that possess these missiles, they're going to shoot missiles over here as well. Even America's allies are going to turn on her, you know, because that's the fate of this place, you know, to be destroyed by fire, you know. And just like brothers mentioned at camp, you know, just like if America isn't going to be destroyed, you know, by fire, then the Heavenly Father owes Sodom and Gomorrah an apology. Which, of course, you know, brothers are being facetious, you know, obviously, you know, but we know that that's exactly what's going to happen, because the Heavenly Father doesn't owe any of us anything, you know, but it's just saying, because these Christians, man, you know, they think this place is going to, you know, carry on forever, you know, and that's not the case. America is going to be destroyed. It's going to get the same judgment that Sodom and Gomorrah and the neighboring cities got, you know, fire and brimstone. But this destruction is going to be extremely great, you know, it's going to be remembered forever, you know, it's going to, you know, the Lord is going to be remembered in the earth again for this destruction, you know, just like he delivered us out of ancient Egypt, you know, and his name was glorified from the mighty acts that he did during that particular time. Well, his name is going to be glorified yet again when he destroys America, aka Babylon the Great, you know. So I was going to get a couple more and that'll be it. It's the book of Revelation, chapter 7 and verse 1. And it says, "And after these things, I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. And I saw," oh yes, Lakia, these are 4 literal angels that are holding back the 4 winds, which the 4 winds represent the destruction, you know, World War III, if you will, because again, there's a set time when this destruction is going to take place, and it won't take place again until the mark of the beast is made mandatory and until the elect are sealed, you know. Verse 2, "And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living power, and he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels, to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, Hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our power and their foreheads." So right, you know, again, once the mark of the beast is made mandatory and the elect are sealed, then this destruction is going to take place, you know. So I'm going to end it with this. This is the book of Revelation, chapter 9 and verse 15. And it says, "And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the 3rd part of men." And right, man, you know, there's a particular hour, day, month, and year when this destruction is going to take place. You know, there's a set time, you know, and it says, "For to slay the 3rd part of men," which you have 3 classes of men on the earth today. You know, you have the sons of God, which today are the biblical Israelites, you know, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, the tribe of Judah, all the way down to the tribe of Issachar. You have the sons of men, which are the heathen nations, and you have the sons of the wicked, which are the nation of Edom, you know, you so-called white people. That's who this destruction is for. It's for you, you know, the wicked. Because the same way you came into power is the very same way you're going to be taken out of power, you know. Verse 16, "And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. And right, John the Revelator is seeing these missiles being launched. 200,000 man, 200 million. Warheads are going to hit this place. Those are the horses that he's seeing in a vision, having those breastplates of fire. Because again, these missiles are made up of different metals. Those are the breastplates, and it says the heads of lions. Because again, these missiles are going to be launched into space. They're going to be launched into space, get their specific coordinates, and then they're going to return back to Earth. And they're going to return back to Earth on fire, because they're going to be traveling so fast. The heads of lions. Verse 18. And this is the main point. It says, by these three was the third part of men killed, by the fire, and by the smoke, and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. Says, for their power is in their mouth, and in their tails. For their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. And right, man, just like it said, this is what the third part of men is going to be killed by. And even you heathens, that are still over here, when that time comes, and 2/3 of Israel, you will be caught up in this destruction with Edom. This destruction is for Esau, but again, you heathens that aren't able to return to your homeland, you were just over here to die. And then 2/3 of Israel, you are over here to receive your final judgment, which is to be burned up with the wicked. Because again, this is the time that we're coming into. We're in some very serious times, man. America is going to be destroyed by fire, without a doubt. So again, China is just, again, one of the few nuclear armed nations that are again upping their nuclear arsenal, ultimately to come up against America, aka Babylon the Great, when that time comes. So, Lord willing, this lesson was edifying. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash. I'd like to give double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who I learned this truth from. And I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. Till next time I say, Shalom.